I've been driving for a rideshare company for the past 3 years, and I've seen all kinds of passengers. Drunks, cheaters, people arguing with their partners over the phone. But nothing could have prepared me for the woman in red. It was a cold Thursday night, just past 1 a.m. The city had that eerie, empty feeling. Streetlights flickering, sidewalks deserted, an occasional car passing by. My shift had been slow, and I was ready to call it a night when a ride request popped up. The pickup location was on the outskirts of town, near an older neighborhood I didn't frequent often. The kind of place with cracked sidewalks, dim streetlights, and houses that looked like they held too many stories. I accepted the ride. A few extra bucks before heading home wouldn't hurt. When I pulled up to the pin on my map, I saw her standing by an old bus stop. She was alone, motionless, a woman in a flowing red dress, her long black hair cascading over her shoulders. She didn't wave, didn't step forward, just stood there as if she had been waiting for something much longer than my arrival. I lowered the window slightly. "You called for a ride?" She nodded, just once, before silently opening the door and slipping into the back seat. I glanced at the rearview mirror, expecting her to greet me, maybe confirm the destination. But she said nothing, just sat there with her hands resting neatly on her lap, looking straight ahead. There was something odd about her presence. Her skin was pale, too pale. Her lips were dry, slightly cracked, like she had been outside for too long, and her perfume. It was faint, but had a strange, almost decaying sweetness to it. The air in the car felt heavier. I cleared my throat. "Long night?" I asked, trying to break the silence. Nothing. I glanced at the app. Her destination was on the other side of town, a 20-minute drive. I told myself maybe she was just tired. Maybe she had been at a party or was dealing with something heavy. Still, something about her unsettled me. The longer we drove, the stranger it felt. She never adjusted her seat, never pulled out her phone, never even looked out the window. Just stillness. Then, at a red light, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. Her reflection in the rearview mirror, it was there, but wrong. The way the light hit her face, it was like the mirror was showing her a second too late, as if there was a delay. I blinked hard. Maybe I was just tired. "Almost there," I muttered. No response. My fingers tightened on the wheel. I turned onto a road I'd never taken before. Her destination was in an older part of town. As I drove deeper, the houses became fewer, replaced by empty lots and old factories. The GPS told me to turn down an even darker, narrower street, barely lit by a single flickering light. I glanced at the mirror again. She was looking at me now. Not just looking, staring. I hadn't seen her move, but her eyes, dark, sunken, and unreadable, were locked onto mine. The light turned green, and I pressed the gas a little harder than I meant to. I just wanted to drop her off and leave. Finally, the GPS announced, "You have arrived." I pulled over in front of an old, abandoned-looking house. The windows were boarded up, the front yard overgrown with weeds. There was no sign of life, no porch light, no car in the driveway. I turned around to tell her we were here. The back seat was empty. The door had never opened. The seatbelt was still fastened. My hands went cold. My breath hitched. I turned on the cabin light, heart pounding, scanning the back seat. There was no trace of her. Nothing except, on the seat where she had been sitting lay a single red rose. And then I saw the notification on my phone. Ride complete. Payment received. But the thing is, there was no name on the ride receipt, just a blank space. My stomach turned. I didn't know what kind of sick joke this was, but I didn't want to be there any longer. I hit the gas and sped away, refusing to look in the mirror again. By the time I got home, my head was spinning. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I was overtired. But that didn't explain the rose. And it definitely didn't explain what I would learn the next day. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. The memory of last night's ride stuck with me like a bad dream, except it wasn't a dream. The empty seat, the blank receipt, the red rose. I told myself it had to be a glitch, a mistake in the system. Maybe she had slipped out when I wasn't looking, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Still, I had to convince myself. I opened the Rideshare app, scrolling to my trip history. Maybe I had missed something. Maybe her name was there now. But when I checked, my stomach dropped. The ride wasn't listed, no record of it, no trip fare, no location history. It was as if it had never happened. I rubbed my face, trying to shake the growing unease. Then I noticed something even stranger, something that sent a cold crawling sensation through my skin. I still had the money. I checked my balance and there it was, the exact fare, deposited into my account, but with no trip attached to it, no passenger. I told myself I needed a distraction, something normal. So I decided to grab a coffee from a diner downtown, the kind of place with old linoleum floors, a radio playing low in the background, and regulars who had probably sat in the same booth for the last 20 years. I pulled up to the curb and stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling. The smell of bacon and coffee helped settle my nerves, at least for a moment. I ordered a black coffee and sat at the counter scrolling through my phone trying to forget, and that's when I overheard the conversation. Two older guys sitting a few stools down, chatting over their plates of eggs and toast. "Yeah, 3 years ago today," one of them said. "You remember that girl, right? The one in the red dress?" My grip on the coffee cup tightened. The other man nodded. "Damn shame. Found her body out near the old bus stop. Took him a while to figure out what happened." The first guy shook his head. "Still don't sit right with me. How does someone just vanish for 3 days and then turn up like that?" I felt my pulse in my throat. I leaned slightly closer. "She was a dancer or something, wasn't she?" the second man asked. "Yeah, worked at that lounge over on 5th. Used to walk home late at night." The man sighed, stirring his coffee. "Damn city's never been safe. She was last seen getting into some guy's car. They never found him." A lump formed in my throat. "Never found him?" the other guy asked. "Nah. But you know what's weird? Every year, some folks say they see her, out by that bus stop. Same dress, same time of night." My breath turned shallow. I pulled up my phone and typed in, "Woman found dead near bus stop, red dress." The first result made my hands go numb. Remembering Vanessa Moore, 3 years since her mysterious death. I clicked on it, a news article from exactly 3 years ago. And there she was, a photo of a woman in a red dress, her dark hair falling over her shoulders. The same woman who had sat in my back seat last night. My vision blurred as I skimmed through the details. Vanessa Moore, 26 years old, worked as a dancer at a lounge downtown, reported missing after failing to return home. 3 days later, her body was found near an abandoned house on the outskirts of town. Cause of death, undetermined. My blood ran cold. That was the house. The same house my GPS had taken me to. I set my phone down, my hands trembling. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm, too bright. My mind raced with questions. Was this some kind of elaborate prank? A case of mistaken identity? Or had I, somehow, given a ride to someone who had been dead for 3 years? The radio playing in the background crackled slightly. And then, just for a moment, I thought I heard something strange. A faint whisper, a voice too soft to understand. I turned, scanning the room. No one was looking at me. No one else seemed to hear it. I grabbed my phone and left a few bills on the counter. I needed air. I needed answers. And I knew exactly where to go next. I sat in my car outside the diner, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My mind spun in 100 different directions. But no matter how I tried to rationalize it, the facts didn't add up. Vanessa Moore had died 3 years ago. I had picked her up last night. That was impossible. And yet, I took a deep breath and checked the address from last night. The old house my GPS had led me to. If I wanted answers, that was the place to start. I shifted into drive. The further I got from the city, the lonelier the road became. The houses grew sparse, replaced by empty lots and boarded-up buildings. By the time I reached the turnoff, my headlights barely cut through the thick trees that lined the narrow street. The house stood at the end of the road, shrouded in silence. It was the kind of place that had been abandoned long before anyone had bothered to board up the windows. The wood was rotting, the porch sagging. A single street lamp flickered near the driveway, casting long, twisted shadows across the yard. My gut told me to turn around. Instead, I killed the engine and stepped out. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and earth. Every step on the gravel felt too loud, like I was trespassing somewhere I didn't belong. I made it to the porch, hesitated, then knocked on the door. Nothing. I tried the handle. It opened. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and something else, something faintly metallic. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, the furniture draped in yellowed sheets. It felt like the kind of place people left in a hurry and never looked back. A gust of wind rattled the broken window near the staircase, making the floorboards groan, and then I saw it. On the floor, near the old fireplace, lay something small and delicate, a red rose. My stomach clenched. It looked fresh, just like the one Vanessa had left in my back seat. I crouched down, reaching for it. Thump! A sound came from upstairs. I froze. Another thump, slow and heavy like a footstep. Someone was up there. I held my breath, straining to listen. Then came another sound. So soft, so chilling, I felt my skin prickle. A faint rustling, like fabric brushing against the floor. A dress, a red dress. I backed away, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. I needed to leave. Now, as I turned, my foot knocked something over. A small wooden box tumbled off the mantel, landing with a hollow clatter. The lid popped open, and a handful of newspaper clippings spilled onto the floor. Shaking, I picked one up. The headline made my blood run cold. Vanessa Moore's murder. Police still searching for missing driver. I grabbed another. Authorities suspect foul play in rideshare case. I couldn't breathe. They never found him. The driver. The one who picked her up that night. The one who took her here. A wave of nausea hit me. I had retraced his steps, driven the same route, stopped at the same place, and Vanessa had gotten into my car. I felt it before I heard it. A presence. Close. Too close. A cold whisper brushed against my ear, soft as a breath. I never got home. I spun around. The doorway to the hall was empty, but the air felt thick, charged, like something unseen was standing just beyond my reach. I backed away, nearly tripping over the fallen papers. My pulse roared in my ears. Then, from the top of the stairs, a single footstep. I didn't wait to see more. I ran. Out the door, across the porch, fumbling with my keys. The moment I got inside, I locked the doors, started the engine, and tore down the road, my tires kicking up gravel. I didn't stop until I was back in the city, until the streetlights and distant hum of life reminded me I was somewhere real, somewhere safe. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that I had brought something back with me, that somewhere, in the dark corners of my rearview mirror, Vanessa Moore was still there, watching, waiting, for what I didn't know, but I had a sinking feeling I was about to find out. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, Vanessa Moore, sitting in my back seat, her pale face just barely visible in the rearview mirror. The way she never spoke, the way she simply stared. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, a trick of my own mind. But the truth clawed at the edges of my sanity. She was real, and she wanted something. By morning, I was running on caffeine and a gnawing sense of dread. I needed answers. The first thing I did was go back to the diner. Maybe someone else had seen her. Maybe I wasn't crazy. Maggie, the waitress, was wiping down the counter when I walked in. She gave me a tired smile. Rough night? I didn't waste time. Maggie, do you remember the woman I picked up the other night? Red dress? Quiet? Her smile faded. What woman? I swallowed. She was sitting right there, at that booth. I pointed to the spot. You even looked at her when I asked if she needed a ride. Maggie frowned, shaking her head. You were alone. No, I wasn't. My voice came out more desperate than I wanted. She was right there. She got in my car. Maggie set down her rag. Honey, you came in here talking to yourself. I remember thinking maybe you were on the phone, but she trailed off, eyeing me warily. I felt the world tilt beneath me. No, I muttered, rubbing my temples. That's not possible. Maggie hesitated. Then, in a softer voice, she said, What's going on? I exhaled. Her name was Vanessa Moore. I picked her up, drove her to an abandoned house, but I found a newspaper article. She died 3 years ago. Maggie paled. For the first time, she looked genuinely scared. What? I asked. She swallowed hard. You said Vanessa Moore? I nodded. Maggie looked around, then leaned in, lowering her voice. I knew Vanessa. Not well, but I remember what happened. She went missing after a rideshare picked her up. They never found the driver, only the car, wrecked. A mile away from that house you're talking about. I felt my stomach twist. She was still inside, I whispered. Maggie shook her head. Number the car was empty. No body, just her phone. Some blood on the seat. A cold weight settled in my chest. They never figured out what happened to her, Maggie continued. Some people say she ran away. Others say the driver took her somewhere and... She trailed off. I suddenly felt sick. I had taken the same route, picked her up in the same way. Had I repeated history? Had I become part of it? Maggie shifted uncomfortably. If you really saw her... She hesitated. Maybe she's trying to tell you something. I spent the next few hours holed up in my apartment, searching for anything I could find on Vanessa Moore. The details were sparse. 25 years old, worked at a law firm. No criminal history, no known enemies. Last seen on the night of her disappearance, wearing a red dress. But one thing stood out, her final phone call. According to records, she had called 911 from inside the car. It lasted only 17 seconds before cutting off. No words, just static, and something else. A sound, a whisper. They had cleaned up the audio, tried to make sense of it, but no one could agree on what was said. But looking at it now with everything I knew, the answer felt disturbingly clear. I never got home. My blood ran cold. Was that why she got into my car? Was she trying to finish the ride she never completed? That night, I sat in my car, hands gripping the wheel. My stomach was in knots, my throat dry. I didn't want to do this, but I knew I had to. I pulled up the Rideshare app and entered an address. Not just any address. Vanessa's old apartment. I hit start ride and waited. The street was empty. No one around. Then, a shadow flickered in my rearview mirror. The back door creaked open. My breath hitched. Slowly, carefully, I looked up. She was there. Vanessa. The red dress. The dark hair. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed. She said nothing. I forced my voice steady. Where to? She didn't answer. I swallowed, put the car in drive, and started driving. The streets blurred past in a haze of streetlights and empty sidewalks. The silence pressed against my ears, thick and suffocating. I glanced in the mirror. She was still there, still watching. As we neared her old apartment, my chest tightened. I didn't know what would happen when we got there. Would she disappear? Would she speak? The address was just up ahead. The red brick building loomed at the end of the street. I pulled up to the curb, turned to look. She was gone. The back seat was empty. A strange stillness filled the air, heavy and final. And then, my phone buzzed. A notification. I looked down. The Rideshare app had marked the trip completed, and below that, a single message. Thank you. The screen flickered, then went dark. I exhaled a shaky breath, and for the first time in 2 nights, I felt something lift. Vanessa had finally made it home. The ride was over, but deep down, I knew I would never forget the silent passenger, and I would never pick up another stranger again.